How are you guys doing? Today is Wednesday, May 11th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile on Thibaut Courtois. The elite Belgian goalkeeper for Real Madrid is now turning 30, and my intention with this episode is, of course, to look at what he's been able to do ever since he's made it onto the big stage, as Thibaut Courtois is one of the world's best goalies right at this moment. You don't just become the starting goalie for Real Madrid by mistake. He is constantly referred to, and I think that he is. He's referred to as one of the best in the game. I think he's coming into one of his own for club and for country. He is definitely a very tough wall to get past if you want to be a goal scorer, considering he even has just like the length and the athleticism to do it. Entering his 30s, if you're not familiar with Thibaut Courtois, he stands at about 6'7", which is very advantageous to what he does as a goalie, because he's just as flexible as a goalkeeper that would be, say, like 6'1" or 6'2". He can hit the splits at a split second, which actually helps him at the end. He can pretty much leap and make all the saves you really want him, and he's an incredible penalty kick goalie. There's no, it's not really a fluke that you end up at Chelsea, Atletico Madrid, and Real Madrid and playing for Belgium, playing deep into tournaments, if you're not a very talented goalie in itself. So, originally coming out of Bree, Belgium, he will go on and make his original debut playing for a top-level club, playing for Genk in 2009. In that debut season, he would only play one game, but after that, he would go on to become the original first-team goalie for Genk in his age 18 season in 2010-2011. In his lone season, starting as a full-time goalie in the Belgian league, he would go on to help the team to the best record in Belgium. Specifically in that league, he would make sure that he would allow only 39 goals in the 40 matches he played, as that Genk team did end up going to Europa League, and he only allowed 4 goals in the 3 Europa League matchups he played. Following that season, he would go on to be recognized as one of the best goalies in Belgium. He would go on to get signed by Chelsea immediately, or he would get signed by Chelsea after that season. And in his first 3 seasons, he was put on loan at Atletico Madrid in Spain, to, of course, because usually people put people on loan if they want to see if they're eventually going to be good. In his very first season on loan at Atletico Madrid, Thibaut Courtois would start all 37 of the matches he played for an Atletico Madrid side that would go on to finish 5th in La Liga within that season. In that season, they would go on to win the Europa League that year, as they ended up beating Athletic Bilbao all the way in the final, just to see how that final ended up going. They ended up winning it 3-0, as of course Courtois was able to hold up a clean sheet, picking up his first big trophy of the year. Going back to La Liga, he would make sure that the team allowed 41 goals, the team allowed 35 goals in the 37 matches he played. He would go on to finish with 15 clean sheets on the season. This is according to Footy Stats. And in those 15 Europa League matches he played, he would go on to allow 7 goals, as he had 8 clean sheets. He had a clean sheet in the majority of the Europa League matches he played. Not to mention that this is also the season that he was called up to the Belgian national team. That 2011-2012 season, that first season in Spain, was that year where Courtois was really thrown into the fire, and people really got a chance to see the type of player that Courtois is. Following that season, like I said, after Atletico's lone trophy would come from the Europa League. This would be their second Europa League title in 2 seasons, by the way. He would come back for a second season on loan with Atletico Madrid in his age 20 season in 2012-2013. In that season, he would go on to start all 37 of the matchups he played for the second year in a row. And in this season, Atletico Madrid would go on to finish 3rd in La Liga. The trophy that they would win within Spain, they would go on to win the Copa del Rey. Not to mention that in 2012, they would go on to win the Super Cup against Chelsea that year, only holding Chelsea to 1 goal that game. And like I said, they would go on to win the Copa del Rey, as they went all the way to the final, and then the team they would end up beating was Real Madrid. The only goal he allowed would be to Cristiano Ronaldo, as Atletico Madrid would beat Real Madrid 2-1. So that was that second season in Atletico. In those 37 La Liga matchups, he had 28 goals allowed as he had 20 clean sheets. In his second La Liga season, he would top the 15 clean sheet mark twice, which is, of course, incredible in itself. And, of course, in addition to that, Courtois was moving his way up, at least like the goalie leaderboards, in terms of being a very impactful player. His third and final season on loan at Atletico Madrid would be his age 21 season. In that season, he would start all 37 games for an Atletico Madrid side that would actually end up winning La Liga. Not to mention, their goalie was on loan. In that third season at Atletico Madrid would probably be one of Thibaut Courtois' best seasons, as he had 20 clean sheets for the second year in a row, topping 15 clean sheets in La Liga for the third year in a row. In that season, where Atletico Madrid would go on to win they won La Liga for the first time since 1996. Thibaut Courtois would allow 22 goals in the 37 matches he played. That's 15 less goals than matches played. He would go on to allow 4 goals in the 5 Copa del Rey matches he played in a season that would see them go all the way to the semifinals and lose. The team that would actually lose to in the semifinal round would end up being Real Madrid. And then in addition to that, this was also like prime Real Madrid years when they won their first Champions League. That year, they would go on to finish as runners-up in the Supercopa to Barcelona. And then they would go on to finish up as runners-up in the Champions League. They went all the way to the final, where they would go on to lose to that Real Madrid team, as Thibaut Courtois was a big part of the reason that they got there. And the 12 Champions League games that he would play in his very first full Champions League season, they would go on to allow 6 goals. He allowed 6 goals in the 12 matches he played, as the team would finish with 5 clean sheets. Following that 2013-14 season, in which Thibaut Courtois would, of course, get called back to Chelsea after his 3 years on loan, where he helped Atletico Madrid win La Liga for the first time in 20 years. He would go on to compete in his very first international tournament with Belgium, as he would compete in the World Cup. And the 2014 World Cup, Belgium would, of course, make it through their group stage after they would go on to beat Algeria, they beat Russia, and they beat South Korea. They held Belgium and South Korea to clean sheets. In the round of 16, they would end up beating the United States in extra time before losing in the quarterfinals to Argentina. So they were actually able to kind of go through a couple of games. And in his very first World Cup, in the 5 matches he played, he would go on to allow only 2 goals on the day, or 2 goals in what would be the entire tournament. So, of course, props to Kevin De Bruyne. Then Belgium would go on to finish with 3, or they finished with 2 clean sheets in the entire tournament. But following that Belgium exit, Thibaut Courtois would officially get called up to his mother club, Chelsea, as he would get called on to start for them. And immediately after winning La Liga, not to mention that he had won the Belgian league before playing for La Liga, he would go on to win his very first Premier League title in his very first season with Chelsea in his age 22 season, 2014-15. Yes, but when he was 23, he had a Belgian title, a Spanish title, and an English title to his name, not to mention a Europa League title. In his age 22 season, Thibaut Courtois would start all 32 of the matches he played in a Premier League season that would go on to see Chelsea win for the first time following, I guess, like a 5-year drought. In that season, they would also go on to win the Football League Cup final against Tottenham, as they won that one on a clean sheet. In that Premier League season, Courtois would allow 28 goals in the 32 matches he played. He had 13 clean sheets, a double-digit amount in his very first season there. In the League Cup, what they would win, he only allowed 1 goal in the 2 matches he played. And not to mention that in Champions League, he would play 5 matches in a season that would, of course, see Chelsea finish in the round of 16. In the round of 16, this Chelsea side would eventually get knocked out by PSG. PSG would get knocked out by Barcelona in the quarterfinal, as Barcelona would go all the way to the final. So that would kind of be how that season went. Not to mention that they would finish in the 4th round of the FA Cup. But in his first season, it was a very successful season for Thibaut Courtois. This was, of course, after his World Cup season as well. This would transition into Courtois' second full season with Chelsea. In his age 23 season, he would only start 23 games in a season where Chelsea would go on to finish 10th in the league. but he would go on to suffer a leg injury, which would kind of make him miss 3 months of competition. But in the games that he played, he would go on to make sure that he would allow, Thibaut Courtois conceded 27 goals in the 23 matches he played in the Prem, as he only had 5 clean sheets. So he was dealing with injury virtually the entire year. Not to mention, alongside that, the closest they would get to winning a title was finishing as the runner-up in the Community Shield, which I believe is the English Super Cup. They ended up losing 1-0 to Arsenal in that matchup. And also that year, they would end up losing in the round of 16 in Champions League. The team that would end up beating Chelsea this season would be PSG. PSG would get knocked out by Man City in the next round, who got knocked out by the eventual champions Real Madrid in the semifinals. But following that, this would lead into Thibaut Courtois' first appearance with Belgium at the Euros, while he would... Not to mention that before this, he was the youngest goalkeeper to represent Belgium before he came in here. So of course, going into his very first Euros, he would go on to help Belgium make it to the group stage, as they would end up losing to Italy, but they would end up beating Ireland on clean sheets. They would end up beating Sweden on a clean sheet as well. In the knockout phase, Belgium would end up beating Hungary 4-0, as of course 4-0 is a clean sheet. They would actually end up losing in the quarterfinals to Wales, as that would be how their tournament would end there. But of course, they would make it through a cup. They would make it at least through a knockout stage before they would get knocked out. Following this quarterfinal exit from the Euros, Thibaut Courtois would, of course, return back to Chelsea for his third season with the club. In his age 24 season, in his 6th season playing for the Chelsea organization, but in his 3rd season with Chelsea, he would go on to start all 36 matchups he played in a season where Chelsea would win the Premier League for the 2nd time in a 2-year stretch, which I don't think is not tied to Thibaut Courtois in some way. Courtois was, of course, incredibly instrumental in this season. He would make sure that the team conceded 25 goals in the 36 matches he played. He had 16 clean sheets. That would be the 2nd time he had double digits in clean sheets in the Premier League, and it would be that would be the most Premier League clean sheets that he would put together. He would go on to play 3 FA Cup games in a stretch that would, of course, see Chelsea finish as runners-up this year. They would end up losing to Arsenal in the final. And that is how that 2016-17 season really kind of came down. They would not even compete in Champions League after they finished 10th the year before. But this would be his 3rd season back, and following a season in which Chelsea would go on to win the title again. That would be his 4th domestic title as the starting goalie. He would come back for his 4th season with Chelsea, his 8th season as a full-time pro, and in his age 25 season in 2017-2018, he would play 35 games in a season where Chelsea would go on and finish 5th in the Premier League. However, the only trophy they would win would be the FA Cup final, as they beat Manchester United 1-0. That is the only time Courtois has won the FA Cup, and not to mention, he was with the team that won the EFL Cup as well. But in that 2017-18 season, in his last season there, he would concede 30 goals in the 35 matches he played, as he had 15 clean sheets. That's the 3rd of his 4 seasons in the Premier that he would have a double-digit amount of clean sheets. Outside of that, looking at how Chelsea would fare in Champions League, Courtois would play 8 matches and concede 12 goals in a season in which Chelsea would end up losing in the round of 16 in Champions League yet again. The team that would knock them out would be Barcelona. Barcelona would lose to Roma in the quarterfinals. Roma would lose to Liverpool in the semis, and Liverpool would end up losing to Real Madrid in the final. So that's how that season ended. Following that, Thibaut Courtois would go on, or following his 4th and final season at Chelsea, Thibaut Courtois would go on to make his 2nd appearance at the World Cup. And the last time he had made it, they would end up losing in the quarterfinals. This year in 2018, Belgium would make it all the way to the 3rd place playoff. They actually finished as the 3rd place team in the 2018 World Cup. In that World Cup, Thibaut Courtois will go on to help Belgium win all the games in their group stage. They beat Panama with a clean sheet. They beat Tunisia 5-2, and they end up beating England 1-0. Of course, another clean sheet for Courtois. In the knockout stages, they would end up beating Japan in the round of 16 3-2. Belgium would beat Brazil 2-1 in the quarterfinal. They would lose to France in the semifinal 1-0, but then they would beat England in the third place playoff game 2-0 with yet another clean sheet from Courtois. Courtois would finish with 3 clean sheets in the World Cup, as he would finish with 5 goals allowed in the 7 games. And following that season, he would go on and get picked up by Real Madrid, where he has been a member since. Not to mention that he was also given the best goalkeeper of the tournament in the World Cup. He was given the Golden Glove right before he went to Real Madrid. Of course, the club that is known for buying the most expensive players at their position as they're entering their primes. He would go on to play there. Also, a big part of the reason that he went back to Madrid is so he could live closer with children. I mean, he lived in Madrid originally. But he would go on to get signed on a 6-year contract. And then he's still in his 4th season right now. Courtois' first season with Real Madrid would be his age 26 season in 2018-19. In that first season, he would start 27 games in a season where Real Madrid would go on to finish with the 3rd best record in La Liga. In the first season without Ronaldo, the team was still doing pretty well within La Liga. They would go on to win the FIFA Club World Cup despite finishing runners-up in the Super Cup. They were going to beat Al Ain, the team from the UAE, in order to win that trophy. That was his first trophy with Real Madrid. And not to mention that in the Super Cup, they did end up losing to Atletico Madrid, his former team. But of course, following that, or I guess within that first season for Real Madrid, he would be responsible for allowing 33 goals in the 27 matches he played. And he had 8 clean sheets on the year. I mean, a little bit of a tough adjustment getting back into La Liga, a league that he's dominated before. In addition to that, he only played 1 Copa del Rey game in a season in which they would lose in the semifinals. And this year, Real Madrid would actually lose in the semifinal leg. They lost it to Barcelona. In addition to that, they would end up losing in the round of 16 of Champions League, as that year they would end up losing to Ajax. Ajax would make it all the way to the semifinals until they lost to Tottenham. Tottenham would lose to Liverpool in the Champions League final this year. But of course, this would transition into Courtois' 2nd season with Real Madrid, his age 27 season in 2019-2020. This is a season that, of course, would see the end of the season get delayed a bit, but he would go on to win La Liga with Real Madrid. I don't know how many goalies have won La Liga with both Atletico and Real Madrid. If Courtois isn't the only one, I'd be very impressed. But in that season, he would go on to start all 34 of the matchups he played that season, as in that 2nd season back in La Liga, he would make sure that the team would concede 19 goals. He had 18 clean sheets in his 2nd season back. This would, of course, be the 4th season he's played in La Liga with a double-digit amount of clean sheets in the first 5 seasons he played there. He would go on to play 7 Champions League games, however, in a season where Real Madrid would end up losing in the semifinals again. But in this round, they would end up losing to Man City. Man City would lose to Lyonnais. Lyonnais would lose to Bayern Munich in the semifinals, as Bayern Munich went on to win Champions League this year. So that's kind of how that year went for Real Madrid. Not to mention they did go on to win the Supercopa de España, as in this particular matchup, they would go on to beat Real Madrid in the final. They actually beat them off penalties. So that would be, in Supercopa, they would go on to beat Atletico Madrid, as they would go on to beat Atletico on penalty kicks, as Thibaut Courtois. Of course, you got to be pretty much on your game as a goalie to help your team win a trophy off of penalty kicks. Following his 2nd season at Real, he would go on to return for his 3rd season, because they did delay Euros for a year because of COVID. His 3rd season with Real Madrid would be his age 28 season. In that season, he would start all 38 La Liga games for the first time I guess ever since Belgium, he would play every single game that was offered. And in that season, Real Madrid would finish as runners-up in the League to Atletico Madrid, as they wouldn't even win a trophy in his third year, but they were a pretty good team all around. They lost in the round of 32 of the Copa de España, the Copa del Rey. But outside of that, they would go on, or I guess within the La Liga games he played, he would go on to concede 28 goals as he had 17 clean sheets. This would, of course, be the second year in a row, and the sixth time in La Liga he's had a double-digit amount of clean sheets. The fifth time that he's had at least 15 as a starting goalie in the Spanish league. So yeah, he has that league pretty much on lock. In addition to that, he would go on to compete in 12 Champions League matchups. He would concede 14 goals, and he would finish with 4 clean sheets in a season where Real Madrid would go all the way to the semifinals of Champions League. They would be met, of course, by Chelsea. Chelsea would go on to beat Real Madrid and then go on to beat Man City in the final, as Chelsea would go on to win a very historic Champions League. And that was, of course, Courtois' former team that would go on to beat him in the process. Following that 2020-21 season, he went to compete with Belgium this past summer in the Euros. In the Euros this past summer, he would go on to help Belgium win every single game in their group stages. They would beat Russia 3-0 on a clean sheet. They would beat Denmark 2-1. They would beat Finland 2-0 on a clean sheet to make it to the knockout phase. They would end up beating Portugal 1-0 in the round of 16 before losing to the eventual champions Italy in the quarterfinals 2-1. But that would be the last time that Courtois has, of course, played in an international tournament, as he is going to be playing with Belgium in the World Cup this year. But so far, the last one he's played to this date that I'm recording this episode is Euros from this past summer. But following that exit, he would go on to make his return in the season that he's in right now, as he's playing in his age 29 season for Real Madrid in 2021-22, as he turns 30 today. This season, Courtois has played 34 games in a season where I believe Real Madrid has already won La Liga. With 3 games left in their schedule, they sit 9 points ahead of Barcelona, who has 2 games left in their schedule. So they've already won it. So with this, Courtois is now holding on to his 3rd La Liga title. Not to mention, after he won in Belgium once and he won the Prem twice, this is his 6th domestic title and his 12th pro season as a starting goalie, to give you a sense of what his impact is. And you could say he's playing for very good teams, but at the same time, as the goalie, his literal responsibility is to make sure that his team stays up there at the very top every year. And I don't think that he gets overlooked necessarily as a goalie. I just think that, when people look at Courtois, the first thing they think about him isn't necessarily that he's won a title every other year that he's been a starter. But that really should give you a hint as to how dominant and how amazing this goalkeeper is in a league or in a world where you have tens of thousands of people that are competing for his job. Being the starting goalie at Real Madrid is one of the top dog jobs in all of sports. And I do think that Thibaut Courtois has shown that he has proven that he is one of the world's best year in and year out. With that said, not to mention outside of what he's been doing with that in the 34 games in La Liga this season, he has conceded 28 goals in the 34 matches he played, as he has 14 clean sheets. With yet another clean sheet, it could be yet another season in La Liga with at least 15. But of course, another season for Courtois with at least 10 clean sheets it's pedestrian for him at this point. You would go on to play 12 Champions League matchups this season, as Real Madrid is actually in the final for Champions League. They are actually set up to play against Liverpool, as this is a chance for Courtois to win Champions League for the first time. I think that's the only trophy that he's missing, except for trophies with Belgium. But yes, he is going to be competing with Belgium, of course, in the World Cup 2022, also between now and his next profile. So I can't wait to see what he does. And I'd recommend watching Thibaut Courtois if you can. He's wearing number 1 for Real Madrid, and of course, he's the starting goalie for Belgium. Thanks once again for listening to this piece. I do hope all is well. If you ever get a chance to watch him do it, I want to thank the Pro Football Reference websites, Footy Stats, Transfermarkt, even the Wikipedia pages I used. I would not be able to do this without them. With this said, I will continue this tomorrow, and hopefully by this time next year, I'll have a lot more to talk about with Thibaut. But with that said, thanks for listening. I hope all is well. And on this day I'm recording, I do want to wish Thibaut Courtois a happy birthday, even though it'll be a while until I post this up on YouTube. Thanks for listening. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you more as I'm catching up on my show. Thanks for listening to my piece. I hope all is well, and peace out.